This is the most significant chapter that we'll be covering to date, as well as probably through the rest of the course. This is going to require 3 different lectures to go through the information. There's a lot here. It would be worth your while to review this a couple times. Make sure that you participate in the discussion boards. Make sure that you look at Google, JavaDoc, and things like that to try and further understand. Again, we're covering a lot in this chapter. The concepts are relatively straightforward once you understand them, but if this is new to you and Java is new to you, you will encounter some surprises and challenges. We're going to go through a concept of collections, specifically one called array list. Before we get too deep into it, collections are nothing more than a grouping of objects of any type that are similar at this point in our course. So I could have an array list of doors, and that door, all the doors in my house would form a collection of doors. An array list is one way of gathering that collection of doors. Builds on the abstraction theme that we went through in the last chapter. In other words, it's trying to make your life easier in collecting everything about doors in one place versus having you try to write all the code yourself. That's one of the advantages of Java, is it has a tremendous number of classes that are already created for you to make your life easier. Requirements to group objects. Many applications involve collections of objects, personal organizers, library, catalogs, student record systems. My favorite analogy is house. So a house could be a collection, or a block could be a collection as well. Number of items to be stored varies. Items should be added or deleted easily without significant code from your side. An organizer for music files might have a single track files. There is no predefined limit to the number of files or tracks. It will tell how many file names are stored in the collection. It will list individual file names and explore the Music Organizer V1 project. That will be on me in a separate demo, which we'll also go through at a later point. Collections are useful classes. We don't have to do a lot of writing from scratch. Java calls libraries. Java calls its libraries packages. That's just their name. It's just a grouping of code. Grouping objects is a recurring requirement. The java.util package contains multiple classes for doing this. Java.util is amazing in what it includes. It has a lot of different information or useful methods and classes that you will use throughout your career. To use an array list, you look at the top, import java.util.arraylist. You could also put an asterisk here, which I'll cover more later. But if you put an asterisk, it means bring everything in from that package. The compiler is smart enough to know which ones you care about and gets rid of everything you don't. Public class music organizer, more filler, and then here it's creating a new array list. This less than greater than, notice that's very different. We'll talk a lot more about this as we get through the course. But in this case, they're creating a generic array list. I tend to err towards specific array lists. There's reasons on both sides. The type of collection in this particular code case is an array list. The type of objects it will contain are string that we're going to go through later. If you were to do that, you had an array list, open parenthesis, string, close parenthesis, and then the variable name. Private is the visibility modifier we've talked again. They will say it's an array list of string. A lot of people just say array list of strings, plural. Either one is fine. Collections are known as parameterized or generic types. Just word to know. An array list implements specific functionality, add, get, size, and there's a bunch more. The type parameter says what we want a list of. So in this case, the type is person, ticket machine, generic, or etc., meaning anything else. We will talk about a superclass eventually called object, and if you leave it with just a less than greater than, it just assumes that. Array list object. In versions of Java prior to 7, you had to do things a little bit different. We're not using that version, so I'm just going to go on. The new one, you can just do the less than greater than, what they're calling the diamond notation. Again, I tend to sway away from this, and I tend to prefer this, but I also started coding earlier. The type parameter can be inferred from the variable being assigned, a convenience we will use. So in other words, by doing this, you can infer it. All right, so with this object diagram, files is an array list. Array list is made up of these two files, morning blues and don't go. These are just occurrences or instances within this. This is an instance within this. Adding a third file would look something like this, where the array list simply has a third instance. Features of the collection. It increases its capacity as necessary. It keeps a private count in an accessor method called size. It keeps the objects in order. Details of how this is all done are hidden from you. This is that whole abstraction concept we talked about. You don't care about the details, you just care about what it does. Now, this sounds really good. When you use a collection, Java has overhead that's on top of it. Depending on what your needs are, you may actually take a performance hit. So while collections are very nice and very helpful, they do take up more memory, they do slow down the operation of your system, and they do have overall impacts. So you need to be careful about which direction you want to go, because a collection may not always be the right answer. It is easier, and it makes your life simpler. That is an excellent argument for the why, but if you're trying to write a high-performance system that you don't need all the capabilities of these collection capabilities, don't use it. Generic classes. We use an array list with any class type, so anything. Notice, class type. Classes, all of that is really important. In other words, you can't do an array list of int. Okay, int is a primitive, not a class. You would have to do an array list of integer with a capital I. Each will store multiple objects of the specific type. Continue down the public class music organizer. Here we define that it's an array list of strings. We're creating an add and a get, right? So a mutator or a setter and a get. Technically that wouldn't be a setter, but hopefully you follow along. So this is going to add to the collection, and this is going to return how many items are in there. There likely would be additional methods. So in this case, index numbering, this is really important. People get it wrong. This starts at 0, then it goes to 1, then it goes to 2. So the 0th item is really the first item, and the third item has an index value of 2. This is a mistake that most developers make at some point. They think that they're working with index number 1, meaning the first element, and they actually get the second one, and their head scratching as to why. Retrieving from a collection. It's as simple as get the index number. So if the index number is greater than 0, this is validity checks, and there's something actually in the index, then allow me to go through. Otherwise, return some kind of error message. Up to you. So in this case, we deleted one. That's what they're showing here. So what would happen? Notice the index numbers at the top. That's a hint for later. General utility of indices. Using integers to index collections has general utility. Index plus 1 is, so whatever the current value is, 1 greater than that is the next one, 1 less than that, unless you're in the 0, is the previous. And the last index number is the array list dot size minus 1. Remember that size represents how many entries are in the array list, but because it starts counting with 0, you have to go back 1. All right, remember the first 3 index items as 0, 1, 2 based on the index. You could also think about accessing items in sequence. Okay? Reviewing that, collections allow an arbitrary number, in other words, any number that you want, of objects to be stored. Class libraries usually contain tried and tested collections, collection classes. That's the whole concept of library, is it's intended for other people to use, so you wouldn't put it out there until you're pretty confident. Java class libraries are called packages. Package is something that we'll cover on how to create those in the future, but it's not necessarily overly important for this class, but it is something you'll care about. We've used array list class from the java.util package in this particular case. With that, I'm going to go ahead and break this presentation and start back up with a new presentation for the next chunk. Hopefully this has been helpful to you and you've gotten something out of it.